Happy birthday, Dad, my daughter Lauren said as she carried my old leather suitcase to the front door. Her husband, Greg, followed behind her with a smile that looked more like a salesman closing a deal than a family member giving a gift. The suitcase was familiar, dark brown with brass clasps, the one Martha and I had bought for our honeymoon in 1978. But I hadn't packed it. In fact, I hadn't touched it since we stored it away after her funeral. I stood in my kitchen doorway, coffee mug trembling slightly in my hand, staring at it like it was a coffin. The zipper was stretched tight, corners bulging with clothes shoved in by someone else. A slip of paper poked out from the side pocket. My handwriting, though shakier than usual. Arthur Benton, Seaside Haven Retirement Community. Lauren? I called toward the stairs, though I knew she wasn't in the house. My voice echoed back to me, thin and strange. On the mantel, Martha's photograph caught the early morning sunlight, her in the soft green dress she'd worn for my 65th birthday, the last one we spent together. She'd insisted on baking me a peach cobbler, even though her hands were already weak from chemo. You spoil me, I'd told her. That's what wives do, she'd replied with a smile, brushing flour from her cheek. The memory hit like a punch. Martha would never have allowed whatever this was. My phone rang. Lauren's name appeared. Happy birthday, Dad, she said brightly, her voice coated with that artificial cheer people use when they're selling bad news as good. We have a very special surprise for you today. Be ready at 2 o'clock sharp. Lauren, there's a suitcase by my door. Did you? Just be ready, Dad. Her voice cooled instantly. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. Harder than what? My throat tightened. I was going to bake my apple pie. You and Greg could stay for dinner like we used to. We'll see about that. Just be ready. The line went dead. I set the phone down slowly, holding it a moment longer than necessary, as if keeping it in my hand could hold on to the daughter who once used to swipe spoonfuls of raw cookie dough from my mixing bowl. I decided to finish the pie anyway. I pulled flour and sugar from the pantry, reached for the jar of apples Martha had canned in our last summer together. I needed the ritual, measuring, mixing, feeling like life was still mine to control. But my hands weren't steady. Flour dusted the counter. A jar slipped, rolling across the floor, the apples thudding like small, heavy reminders that time doesn't give second chances. I caught my reflection in the kitchen window, 70 years old, hair silver and uncombed, pajama shirt wrinkled from a restless night. When had I become this stranger? And when had my own daughter started speaking to me like I was already gone? By 1:30, the pie was cooling on the rack, the smell filling the house like it always had. I set the dining table with our wedding china, 3 places, perfectly arranged, the white plates with the thin gold rims Martha always insisted were for special occasions. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe this surprise was a weekend trip, a family celebration. But at 2 o'clock sharp, Greg's black SUV rolled into the driveway. Lauren sat in the passenger seat, eyes on her phone. Greg didn't look toward the house at all. The suitcase still waited by the door. And in my chest, something cold began to spread. I opened the door before they could knock, a dish towel still in my hands from tending the pie. Dad, Lauren said, hugging me with the kind of half-hearted embrace you give a stranger at a work function. She smelled faintly of expensive perfume layered over something sharper, impatience. Greg didn't bother with small talk. Ready to go, Arthur? Actually, I said, forcing a smile. The pie just finished cooling. Your mother's recipe, Lauren. Why don't you both come in? I've set the table. No time, Dad, she cut in, that edge in her voice like glass waiting to cut skin. Greg was already lifting the suitcase, walking it down the steps as if my belongings were just packages to be delivered. The casual way he handled it, without permission, without even looking at me, made my jaw tighten. Late for what, exactly? I asked. They didn't answer. I followed them to the car, taking in the porch swing where Martha and I had watched countless sunsets, the garden she tended until the summer before she passed. I wondered if I'd see her again. They put me in the back seat, like a child being driven to summer camp. Greg's music, loud, electronic beats, filled the car. Conversation was impossible. When I reached for the volume knob, Lauren's eyes met mine in the mirror, sharp enough to stop me. We passed familiar places, Miller's Pond, where I taught her to skip stones, the corner diner where Martha and I shared coffee every Sunday after church, the hardware store where I'd worked part-time after retiring from engineering, helping young folks with their first home repairs. Each landmark felt like a goodbye I hadn't agreed to. Where exactly are we going? I finally asked as we left the main roads for smaller, unfamiliar ones heading toward the coast. Greg caught my eye in the rearview mirror and smiled, not warmly, but with the smugness of someone who thinks he knows something you don't. Somewhere you'll be much happier, Arthur. Trust us. The word trust tasted bitter. Lauren didn't look up from her phone. I saw the glow of a text message reflected on her face, finally doing it much better this way. She tapped quickly, like she was sealing a deal. 20 minutes later, we rounded a bend, and there it was, Seaside Haven Retirement Community. A sprawling complex of glass and white siding, lawns so perfectly cut they looked artificial. A banner near the entrance read, "Where life begins again." My stomach tightened. Are we visiting someone? I asked, though I already knew. Lauren turned with a brightness that wasn't real. Happy birthday, Dad. This is your new home. The words landed like a hammer blow. The pie's still on the counter, I murmured, mostly to myself. The table's set. Greg parked under the covered entrance, already reaching for my suitcase. Through the windshield, I saw elderly residents in wheelchairs, some staring off toward the ocean, others watching us with curiosity. This is temporary, right? I asked, my voice smaller than I wanted it to be. Let's just see how you settle in, Lauren replied, not meeting my eyes. The automatic glass doors slid open ahead of us, letting out a gust of cool, conditioned air that smelled faintly of disinfectant. Everything inside was pristine, orderly, final. As Greg dragged the suitcase forward, I noticed the way Lauren checked her watch, her foot tapping against the concrete. This had been planned for some time. How long will I be staying here? I asked again, my words deliberate. Lauren's tone softened, but it was the practiced softness of a real estate agent smoothing over a problem. This is for your own good, Dad. You're not getting any younger, and we can't give you the level of care you need. Care. As though the house I'd built, the garden Martha planted, and the life I'd maintained meant nothing now. I stepped inside, the doors hissing shut behind me. The marble floors gleamed under fluorescent lights, reflecting generic paintings that could have hung in any motel lobby in America. Lauren and Greg flanked me, shepherding me toward the reception desk. This is for your safety, Lauren murmured. But I wasn't thinking about safety. I was thinking about the mortgage I'd helped them with, the car loan I co-signed, the years I'd quietly funded Greg's faltering coffee shop. Through the glass doors, I caught sight of Greg leaning toward Lauren, whispering. I moved closer, just enough to hear. Once the place sells, we can clear the business debt and expand, he said. Lauren nodded. The realtor thinks we can get at least $700,000, more if we list before summer. A cold clarity settled over me. This wasn't about care. This was about my house, my assets, my life, all parceled and priced before I'd even left the driveway. And in that moment, I realized something they didn't. They thought they were ending my story. They had no idea I was just turning the page. The receptionist was a middle-aged woman with a polite smile that didn't quite touch her eyes. She typed something into her computer, slid a clipboard toward me, and asked me to confirm my personal information. Lauren answered for me before I could open my mouth. It's all correct. she said, taking the pen from my hand and signing my name without hesitation. I stared at the flowing signature, my name in her handwriting. Greg was already setting my suitcase against the wall as though it belonged there, as though I belonged there. "This is your care coordinator, Ms. Harris," the receptionist announced, gesturing to a woman in light blue scrubs approaching from the hallway. "She'll show you to your room." Ms. Harris had the trained warmth of someone who'd said welcome 1,000 times without ever meaning it. "Mr. Benton, if you'll follow me, I'll get you settled." We took an elevator to the second floor. Beige walls, muted carpet, framed photographs of Maine lighthouses, generic enough to be in a dentist's office. When she opened the door to my room, I had to remind myself to keep my expression neutral. It was smaller than the storage shed behind my house. A narrow bed with white industrial sheets, a dresser that looked like it had survived 3 decades of cheap motels, and one window facing the parking lot. From there, I could see Greg's SUV still idling. "Dinner's at 5, Ms. Harris said, pointing to a laminated schedule taped near the door. "Activities are down the hall if you feel like socializing. Physical therapy starts Monday if your doctor recommends it." I didn't remember agreeing to any of this. She left with a promise to check on me later, the door clicking shut with the quiet finality of a prison cell. I sat on the edge of the bed. The mattress dipped too far, swallowing my weight. My suitcase was there, waiting, a stranger's idea of what my life required. I unzipped it. Inside were shirts I hadn't worn in years, socks with thin spots in the heels, underwear so old Martha would have thrown them out without hesitation. But the important things, the things that mattered, were missing. No gold watch Martha had given me for our 25th anniversary, engraved with "Forever Yours, M." No leather-bound notebooks where I'd recorded 40 years of designs, engineering notes, and ideas. No family photo albums. Gone. I remembered the day Lauren had offered to help organize my closet a few months ago. The careful way she'd set aside certain drawers. The small jewelry box in her lap. The way she said, "These old things just clutter up your space, Dad." Now I understood. She'd been erasing me piece by piece. Not just from my home, but from my own history. I stood at the window, watching the Atlantic fade into evening shadows. Down in the lot, Greg's SUV finally pulled away. That should have been the moment I felt abandoned. Instead, I felt something else, the same stubborn resolve that had gotten me through nights in a freezing garage building the first prototype for the medical device company I'd started in the 80s. They thought they'd left me powerless here. They didn't know I still owned 15% of Seaside Haven. Lauren had never cared to ask about the Benton Family Foundation. She assumed my life was just Social Security checks and the value of my house. She didn't know that for decades, Martha and I had invested in senior care facilities, medical research, and technology. She didn't know I had contacts, legal, financial, and political, who answered my calls without hesitation. The sound of the elevator arriving down the hall broke my train of thought. I heard footsteps, quick, purposeful, coming toward my room. There was a knock. "Mr. Benton?" a man's voice asked. "Yes?" The door opened, and in stepped a tall man in a dark suit, not the kind of person who belonged in these beige hallways. He looked around the room like it offended him. "I'm Daniel Fitzpatrick," he said, extending a hand. "Executive Director of Seaside Haven. I understand there are some concerns about your admission paperwork." I shook his hand, firm and deliberate. "Yes. I want to see every document related to my placement here." Now. Something flickered in his eyes, surprise, maybe even recognition. "Of course. Sir. Let's step into my office." The office was on the first floor, carpet thicker, walls decorated with original art instead of prints. He pulled a file from his desk, sliding it toward me. Inside was a forged power of attorney, my signature. Copied well enough to fool someone who didn't know my hand shook slightly since Martha's death. A medical evaluation from a doctor I'd never met. All signed and submitted by my daughter. I looked up at Fitzpatrick. Do you know what happens to a facility that admits someone based on forged documents? His throat bobbed as he swallowed. It would be a serious matter. Try criminal fraud, false imprisonment, loss of license. He shifted in his chair. Mr. Benton, I assure you, we had no idea. I'm sure you didn't. But you do now. And you're going to give me time, and access to my phone, so I can decide what happens next. He hesitated. I leaned forward. That wasn't a request. Fitzpatrick's office went very still after my last words. I could almost hear the hum of the air conditioning over his shallow breathing. Finally, he reached into a desk drawer and slid my cell phone toward me. I'll give you privacy, he said. I took the phone and waited for the door to close before dialing a number I hadn't used in nearly a year. Arthur Benton. Came the familiar voice of Marcus Hale, my attorney and longtime friend. I was wondering when you'd finally need me for something other than golf. I'm at Seaside Haven in Bar Harbor, I said without preamble. I've been admitted under forged documents. Power of attorney, medical evaluation, all fake. I need a full team on this by morning. Marcus didn't waste time with questions. Who forged them? My daughter Lauren with Greg's help. And Marcus, they've already stripped my house of personal items. Jewelry, notebooks, photographs. Everything that matters. There was a pause, the kind where you can almost hear someone's jaw tightening. I'll have 3 attorneys on site by 8 a.m. And Arthur, don't sign a single thing. I wasn't planning on it. After ending the call, I sat back in Fitzpatrick's chair for a moment, staring out the window toward the ocean. The tide was going out, slow, deliberate, inevitable. That was how this would go. When Fitzpatrick returned, I handed him a list of instructions. You're going to make copies of every page in my file. You're also going to provide a list of all senior staff and the facility's admission procedures. I want them by tomorrow morning. He looked like he wanted to argue, but something in my expression stopped him. Yes, sir. Back in my room, I made my second call, to Sarah Klein, the Benton Foundation's investment manager. Arthur? I thought you were still on your winter break in Florida. Change of plans? I said. We have a facility in our portfolio, Seaside Haven, that's about to become a public relations disaster. I want a full audit of its finances and staffing. Quietly for now. Sarah's voice sharpened. Should I assume this is connected to you being there? You should assume, I said, that this will involve both legal and operational changes. Start the audit tonight. By the time I ended the call, the institutional dinner bell was ringing down the hall. I didn't go. I wasn't interested in Salisbury steak under fluorescent lights. Instead, I walked the hallways, paying attention with an engineer's eye. Carpet worn thin near the nursing stations. 2 aides for an entire wing of residents. Common areas with a single television blaring daytime reruns to an audience of 3 half-asleep seniors. I turned a corner and found an activity room, empty except for a chessboard missing half its pieces. A folded sign on the table read Chess Club suspended until further notice. I imagined Martha here, shaking her head. Money without purpose is just paper, she'd always said. Back in my room, I opened my notebook, not the stolen one, but a small legal pad I kept in my coat pocket. I began writing 2 lists. Immediate actions. Legal team here by morning. Document all missing property. Secure statements from staff about admission process. Facility improvements post-control. Restore chess club. Upgrade library with large print books. Establish art therapy program. Increase staff-to-resident ratio. The knock on my door startled me. It was Ms. Harris again, holding a plastic-wrapped dinner tray. Mr. Benton, you missed meal service. I was busy, I said, taking the tray but setting it on the dresser unopened. She lingered, shifting from foot to foot. I heard you met with Mr. Fitzpatrick. I did. She lowered her voice. If you're planning to make changes here, just know the residents could use someone on their side. Our eyes met. She wasn't just being polite. She was tired, the kind of tired that comes from seeing too many things wrong and being unable to fix them. I nodded. Noted. When she left, I sat by the window, looking down at the parking lot. Greg's SUV was gone, but in its place, I pictured something else: news vans, reporters, and the kind of scrutiny Lauren and Greg had never imagined. It would come. Because tomorrow morning, the fight would begin in earnest. The next morning, the knock on my door came at 7:58 a.m. sharp. 3 people stepped inside, 2 in tailored suits, 1 in business casual. Marcus Hale led the way, his salt and pepper hair a little wilder than usual, eyes sharp and already scanning the room like a crime scene investigator. Arthur, he said, shaking my hand, I brought reinforcements. This is Kelly Moore, our litigation expert, and Dan Patel, who'll handle property recovery. Kelly already had a notepad open. First, we need a detailed timeline. Every interaction with your daughter regarding property, finances, or health, start from the earliest suspicious incident. I told them everything: the helpful closet cleanouts, the disappearing items, the forged signature tremor Lauren had overlooked, the sudden suitcase by the door. I made sure to include every date I could remember. Engineers know the power of specifics. Dan was typing on a slim laptop. We've already filed for an emergency injunction to prevent the sale of your house. Court hearings in 3 days. In the meantime, Arthur will need access to the home for inventory and evidence collection. Sarah Klein is conducting a quiet audit of Seaside Haven, I added. When she's done, we'll have leverage over this place, too. Marcus smirked. You're not just fighting back, you're planning a takeover. I shrugged. Why waste a good opportunity? At 9:30, Marcus requested a meeting with Fitzpatrick. The man looked uneasy but ushered us into his office. Marcus set a digital recorder on the desk. Mr. Fitzpatrick, please state your name and position for the record. The director glanced at me, then back at Marcus. Daniel Fitzpatrick, Executive Director, Seaside Haven Retirement Community. Kelly slid the forged power of attorney across the desk. Is this the document your facility relied upon to admit my client? Yes, he said, voice low. Did you verify the signature with Mr. Benton or an independent party? Fitzpatrick hesitated. No. The family presented it as complete. Marcus leaned in. So you admitted a resident, stripped him of his home and possessions, based solely on unverified paperwork? Fitzpatrick's shoulders sagged. We've been under pressure to maintain occupancy rates. The state inspections. Spare us the excuses, Marcus interrupted. This isn't just bad procedure. This is actionable negligence. I watched Fitzpatrick flinch. He knew exactly how deep this could go, and how much he stood to lose. When the meeting ended, Marcus pulled me aside. He's scared. We can use that. If Seaside Haven cooperates with our investigation, we keep their exposure lower. If not, he let the sentence hang. By noon, Dan had already filed the property recovery claim. My house keys, still in my pocket, felt heavier knowing they might not have been mine for much longer without this intervention. I skipped lunch again, choosing instead to walk the grounds. On the eastern side of the property, I found a fenced garden, locked and overgrown. A faded sign read Therapeutic Garden, temporarily closed. Martha would have hated seeing it abandoned. She believed that hands in the dirt could heal a wounded spirit. As I stood there, an elderly man in a wheelchair rolled up beside me. His name tag read Ed in thick black marker. Garden's been shut for almost a year, he said. squinting toward the weeds. Budget cuts. Would you use it if it reopened? I asked. He looked at me like I'd asked if he wanted to breathe. Every day. I made a note in my pocket pad, reopen garden, community project. Back in my room, Marcus returned with news. Police are on their way to execute a search warrant at Lauren's house. We've traced a $1,500 payment from Greg's business account to a known document forger. It's enough to start criminal charges. I didn't smile, but I did allow myself the smallest exhale of relief. Arthur, Marcus said, leaning against the dresser. Once this breaks, it's going to be public. Do you want that? Yes, I said without hesitation. Not just for me. For every person here who doesn't have the resources to fight back. He studied me for a long moment before nodding. Then let's make it count. That night, I walked down to the common room. A few residents were playing cards under the dim glow of ceiling lights. Ed was there, sipping tea. I joined them, not to pass the time, but to listen. The stories I heard over the next hour, about lost savings, families who'd stopped visiting, and rooms stripped of personal belongings, confirmed what I already suspected. Seaside Haven was not a sanctuary. It was a machine that ran on indifference. But machines can be rebuilt. And I had every intention of rebuilding this one. The next morning, the news vans arrived before breakfast. I was in the hallway outside my room when I saw them through the second-floor window. 2 white vans with satellite dishes, their side panels emblazoned with Channel 7 News and Coastal Maine Report. Lauren and Greg had underestimated just how fast Marcus could move. By 9 a.m., Detective Rachel Morrison from the Bar Harbor Police Department walked into Seaside Haven's lobby. She wasn't the soft-spoken type. Her dark hair was pulled back in a no-nonsense ponytail, and she carried a slim black briefcase that looked heavy with evidence. Mr. Benton, she said, shaking my hand firmly. I've reviewed the preliminary file your attorneys sent over. This isn't just fraud. This is a calculated exploitation of an elder family member. Behind her, Fitzpatrick hovered nervously. Detective, I want to assure you that. She cut him off without looking his way. Mr. Fitzpatrick, I'll speak to you after I've interviewed my primary witness. We sat in the facility's conference room. Morrison opened her laptop, already pulling up photographs. These were taken during the search of your daughter's home at 7:15 this morning. On the screen, I saw Ellen's, no, Martha's, gold watch laid out in an evidence bag, my engineering notebooks stacked neatly, our family photo albums lined up like library volumes. Morrison clicked to the next image, a yellow legal pad covered in clumsy attempts at my signature. Found in Greg's desk drawer, she said, along with a printed template for a fake medical evaluation form, purchased from an online novelty documents site. I felt my jaw tighten. They really thought this would hold up in court. People get arrogant when they believe their victim is powerless, Morrison replied, tapping on her keyboard. We also found a payment record to Derek Coulter, a known document forger. He's agreed to testify in exchange for a reduced sentence. From across the table, Marcus leaned back in his chair, looking almost satisfied. That paper trail is as good as a confession. Morrison nodded. They're being charged with elder abuse, fraud, conspiracy, and identity theft. Bail's been set high enough that they won't be going anywhere for a while. I sat back, letting the reality sink in. They were actually going to face the consequences. But this wasn't just about my personal victory. Detective, I said, when you're done with the criminal case, I want to talk about a civil action on behalf of other residents here who've been taken advantage of. There's a pattern at Seaside Haven. Her eyes narrowed, interested. Then you'd better start documenting everything. By the time she left, the lobby was buzzing. Residents whispered to each other, curious about the official-looking woman who just swept in and left with Fitzpatrick trailing behind like a man being pulled into a storm. That evening the news hit. I was in the common room when the anchor read the headline: Local couple arrested for exploiting elderly father in scheme to seize home and assets. Lauren's coffee shop headshot filled the screen, all practiced warmth and perfect hair. The anchor's voice carried on. The victim, Arthur Benton, is a retired engineer and founder of Benton Medical Technologies, known for developing portable heart monitoring devices. Police say the suspects forged legal documents to commit him to a care facility and planned to sell his home to cover business debts. A few residents turned to look at me, eyes wide. Ed gave a low whistle. Well, I'll be damned. That's your daughter? I met his gaze steadily. Yes. And she's going to learn there are lines you don't cross. My phone buzzed on the table beside me. Lauren. I let it ring. A minute later, it buzzed again, this time, a voicemail. I didn't check it. Instead, I stood, walked to the bulletin board at the far end of the room, and began tacking up a fresh sheet of paper, resident improvement suggestions. The first entry in my handwriting was simple. Reopen the garden. Restore the chess club. Add real books to the library. When I turned around, a small crowd had gathered, some residents already reaching for the pen. I stepped back, letting them add their own voices. By the time I returned to my room, the paper was half full. And I knew this was the beginning of something bigger than my case. The morning after the news broke, Seaside Haven felt different. Staff members moved a little faster, eyes darting toward me when they thought I wasn't looking. Fitzpatrick kept his distance, though I caught him lingering in the hallway once, as if trying to gauge my mood before deciding whether to approach. I didn't make him wait long. At 9 o'clock sharp, I walked into his office with Marcus on one side and Sarah Klein on the other. Mr. Fitzpatrick, I began. You're aware the Benton Family Foundation owns a 15% stake in Seaside Haven? He nodded warily. That means I'm not just a resident. I'm an investor. And I intend to see a return, not in dollars, but in dignity. I handed him a printed list, the same one I'd started on the bulletin board in the common room. Reopen the therapeutic garden within 30 days. Restore the chess club with proper equipment. Replace the outdated library stock with large print and accessible books. Launch an art therapy program. Increase staffing levels for direct resident care. These aren't suggestions, I said. They're requirements. And the foundation will fund the first year, provided they're implemented immediately. Fitzpatrick's eyes flicked to Sarah. She didn't smile. I've already reviewed the budget. The costs are modest compared to the facility's operating revenue. There's no financial reason to delay. Marcus leaned forward. But if you refuse, I'm sure the press would be very interested to learn how a community facility ignored reasonable improvements proposed by one of its own board investors, especially in the wake of a scandal. That landed. Fitzpatrick cleared his throat. We'll begin planning. You'll begin doing, I corrected. Planning is what got this place into trouble. Action is what will save it. By lunchtime, word had spread among the residents. Ed rolled up to my table in the dining hall, grinning. Heard the garden's opening again. Is that true? It will be, I said. And you'll be the first one through the gate. His face lit up in a way that told me this was about more than plants and soil. It was about being seen, remembered, valued. That afternoon, I walked the grounds with Sarah, taking notes on neglected spaces. We found a large, unused room in the east wing, dusty, with stacked chairs and faded curtains. This could be the art room, I said, picturing Martha at an easel, sunlight on her face. Sarah nodded, already jotting down renovation estimates. With a few student volunteers from the local college, this could be operational in 2 weeks. The next day, the local paper ran a follow-up article. Seaside Haven investor and resident leads reform effort after family fraud case. The reporter had photographed me standing beside Ed in front of the locked garden gate, my hand resting on the chain. By the time the article hit the stands, donations from townsfolk had started coming in: packets of seeds, new chess sets, boxes of books. The community wanted to help. Fitzpatrick, to his credit, didn't try to stop it. Whether out of genuine support or self-preservation, he authorized the first wave of changes within a week. I made sure to be present for each one. The day the garden gates opened again, residents gathered under a pale blue sky, some with walkers, others in wheelchairs. Ed was at the front, his hands gripping the wheels with a quiet determination. When the lock snapped open, there was a cheer, not loud, but heartfelt. People moved inside slowly, touching leaves, smelling the soil, claiming small patches to tend. I caught Sarah watching from the path. "This is just the start," she said. I nodded. "We're not just fixing a garden. We're restoring a sense of home." That evening, back in my room, I found a thick envelope on my nightstand. No note, just a stack of printed photographs. Lauren and Greg in handcuffs, being led out of their house by 2 uniformed officers. The press swarming them, microphones extended, cameras flashing. It should have felt like vindication. But all I saw was the widening gap between who my daughter had been and who she'd chosen to become. I set the envelope aside. There would be time to think about that later. For now, there was work to be done, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. By midsummer, Seaside Haven didn't feel like the same place I'd been dragged into months earlier. The garden flourished, neat rows of tomatoes, herbs, and flowers tended daily by residents who now had a reason to leave their rooms. Ed practically lived out there, teaching others how to prune roses or stake beans. The chess club had returned with a vengeance, tables set up in the renovated recreation room where laughter and the occasional groan over a blundered move replaced the dull hum of daytime TV. The library, once a dusty corner with 3 warped shelves, now spanned an entire wall with new large print books, audiobooks, and a small reading nook. Even Fitzpatrick's posture had changed. He no longer slunk through the halls, avoiding eye contact. He'd begun greeting residents by name, sometimes even joining in on chess games or garden walks. Whether it was guilt, gratitude, or just survival instinct, I didn't care. Results mattered more than motives. But while Seaside Haven was coming alive, the courthouse in Portland was preparing for something else entirely: the trial of Lauren and Greg. Marcus called me into his office, well, technically the small conference room we'd commandeered, to go over the witness list. "Arthur, you'll be the prosecution's lead witness," he said, sliding a folder toward me. "Detective Morrison will testify about the forged documents, the recovered property, and the payment to the forger. We've also got financial records showing the plan to sell your house." I flipped through the pages, seeing my own handwriting in past statements, photographs of my stolen belongings tagged as evidence, and text messages from Lauren to Greg about finally getting it done. "Are they going to plead out?" I asked. Marcus shook his head. "Their lawyer thinks they can spin this as a family misunderstanding." I let out a humorless laugh. "Good luck with that." The trial began on a Tuesday in September. The courtroom was cool, the kind of climate control that made you wish you'd brought a sweater. Lauren sat at the defense table, hair pulled back, wearing a pale blue blouse that might have been chosen to make her look softer, more trustworthy. Greg was beside her, his jaw clenched, eyes fixed on the table. When my turn came, I walked to the stand without hesitation. The prosecutor's questions were direct. "When did you first notice items missing from your home? What did your daughter tell you about why she was taking them? When were you presented with the suitcase at your door? Did you give permission to be admitted to Seaside Haven?" Each answer was clear, calm, deliberate. I wasn't there to perform. I was there to tell the truth. When it was the defense attorney's turn, the questions turned sharp. "Mr. Benton, isn't it true your daughter was only concerned for your well-being?" "No," I said simply. Isn't it possible you agreed to this move and simply forgot? I leaned forward, looking the man directly in the eye. I built a company that developed medical devices for memory care. I know the difference between forgetting and being lied to. This was no lapse, it was a theft. Lauren's eyes flicked toward me then, but I didn't return the look. By the third day, the evidence was overwhelming. The jury took less than 4 hours to return with guilty verdicts on all major counts. 18 months for Lauren. 24 for Greg. The sentencing didn't bring joy, only a quiet finality, like closing the last page of a chapter you never wanted to read in the first place. When I returned to Seaside Haven that evening, Ed was waiting in the garden. "How'd it go?" he asked. "They won't be coming around for a while," I said. He nodded. "Good. You've got better things to do." And he was right. Because as much as this had started as a fight to reclaim my own dignity, it had grown into something far larger. The Benton Foundation had just approved a 3-year funding plan for Seaside Haven, expanding programs, increasing staff wages, and creating partnerships with local schools and community groups. We weren't just repairing damage anymore. We were building something better than what had been there before. That night, I stood in the garden as the sun set over the Atlantic, the sky painted in streaks of orange and purple. I could almost hear Martha's voice beside me. "Not bad for an old man," she'd say. Not bad at all. A year to the day after I'd been left at Seaside Haven with the suitcase I hadn't packed, I found myself standing in my own kitchen again. The smell of fresh cherry pie filled the air. Martha's recipe, the one she'd insisted was too simple to ever fail. My house looked almost exactly as it had before that day, except for one important change. Every room now held something new, something from Seaside Haven. A watercolor of the garden in full bloom hung above the fireplace. A carved wooden chess set, a gift from Ed, sat on the coffee table. A framed photo of the residents laughing around the new art tables rested beside Martha's picture on the mantel. At precisely 2 o'clock, the doorbell rang. It wasn't Lauren. She was still serving her sentence, and I doubted she'd have come even if she could. No, it was Aiden, taller than the last time I'd seen him, his college sweatshirt rumpled from a long drive. "Happy birthday, Grandpa," he said, stepping inside with a genuine smile. We sat at the kitchen table, the same table Martha and I had chosen 40 years earlier. I slid a stack of papers toward him, the official documents naming him as the successor trustee of the Benton Family Foundation. "Martha always believed wealth was just a tool," I said. "The trick was making sure the tool built something worth keeping." Aiden nodded, his eyes scanning the pages. "I've been taking nonprofit management courses. I want to do this right." "You will," I said. "Just remember, the people you help will never care about your title. They'll remember how you treated them." After he signed, we drove together to Seaside Haven for my weekly board meeting. The changes in the past year were nothing short of remarkable. The garden, now expanded, had walking paths and benches donated by local businesses. The chess club hosted monthly tournaments with visitors from the community. The art therapy program had a waiting list for classes, and the East Wing buzzed with color and creativity. When we arrived, Ed waved us over. "Arthur, we're about to start the first intergenerational garden day. Kids from the elementary school are planting sunflowers with us." I introduced Aiden to everyone, watching as he shook hands, listened, and asked questions. He had Martha's patience, that ability to make people feel like they were the most important person in the room. The board meeting itself was short: progress reports, budget approvals, updates on resident satisfaction surveys that now consistently ranked us in the top 5% statewide. As we left, I noticed a new plaque near the entrance. "The Benton Garden, dedicated to restoring dignity." Someone had chosen those words carefully, but I didn't ask who. That evening, back in my kitchen, Aiden and I lit a single candle on the cherry pie. Not a symbol of loneliness this time, but of continuity. A bridge between what had been taken and what had been rebuilt. Make a wish, Grandpa, Aidan said. I didn't need to. The wish had already come true, not in the courtroom verdict, not in the public headlines, but in the laughter of residents playing chess, in the sound of children's voices in the garden, in the steady hands of a young man ready to carry a legacy forward. After Aidan left, I sat in my armchair by the window, the Atlantic stretching out into the fading light. The tide rolled in, patient and unstoppable, just like the changes we'd made. I thought of Martha, of her belief that money without purpose was just paper, and purpose without action was just talk. We had both, now. And for the first time in a long while, I felt the quiet satisfaction of a life not just lived, but lived well, right to the end.